right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Josh and Becca Friedman, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben Rav Chaim Raphael, as well as for an aliyah for the shamas of all of those who are murdered Akidah Hashem on Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael, for a safe return for all of our hostages and all of our chayalim, and a complete and enduring refuah for all those who have been injured. Semi and Malka Esther, in memory of their parents, Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, Yitzchok Leib Ben Aaron HaKohen, and Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram. The Pepper family, in memory of their brother and uncle Yosef Pepper, Yosef David Ben Yaakov Zichron Livracha, and we as a shir dedicate the entire Maseches Bava Kama Li'ilui Nishmas Master Sergeant Elio Michal Charush. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas have an aliyah and the families in Nechama, and indeed Besoros Tovos and Geula for all of Klal Yisrael. But say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is beautiful daf every day. Today's daf is daf Lamed Gimel, and we left off yesterday. We really have a lot to do today. Yeah. All right, you know what? Let's just actually, just for the sake of expediency, although they're not going to be expedient in any way, shape, or form, let's pick up Massive Rava. It's just the easiest place, even though we did it yesterday. Second wide line, 32b. 32b. Okay, so remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit again. So remember, the Mishnah introduced us to a variety of different cases where halacha l'maisa, actually, let's just go to the Braisa. The Braisa spoke about a case of a person who enters into a carpenter shop, right? So Reuven is a carpenter, he has a store, Shimon goes ahead and walks in. So what's the halacha? And he walked in shelo b'reshus, without permission, a splinter flies up, kills Shimon. Ultimately, again, Reuven will be pater. However, if he entered in b'reshus, if he entered with permission, then Reuven ultimately again will be chayiv. So Rava explained that Allah L'maisa, the case over here is talking about what does it mean that he's pater? He's pater from galus. Now, remember again, I mentioned this at the end of the shir yesterday. Galus, we look at galus as a punishment, but the real truth is galus is not a punishment. What is galus? Galus is a kapara. It's a form of atonement. So therefore, again, so when does galus atone? Galus only atones ultimately again when it is a pure accident. But if there's an element of karov lemezid, if there's an element of some liability or some heightened level of, or some lessened level of accident, and maybe leaning a bit more towards a bit of pshib, bit of negligence, so in that kind of case, so exile, so galus cannot atone. So massive Rava asked the kasha. Let's go. Hosef loretzu achas umeis. If Rabbi says Reuven was being flogged by Beis Din, and let's say again, Allah said they added on an additional lash. What's the halacha? And as a result, Reuven died. Hareza gola al yado. So we'll say, sounds like the flogger ultimately again will be sent to galus. The shoge karvel mezidu the boy asuke adaite the maisi inish bechaderutzua the katan hareza gola. But I will say this doesn't really seem to be a shogeg case. This isn't really what kind of case is this? This is what we call shogeg karov lemezid. It's shogeg in that what? Obviously, again, the flogger didn't mean to kill anyone, but it's karov lemezid. Karov lemezid means it's a little bit negligent. Why? Because he should have been, right? He has a job. What's his job? To flog and count, right? It's a two-pronged job. Pretty straightforward job description. Flog, count. So he didn't go ahead and keep count. So that's a shtickle negligence. So why should he go to galus? We'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, it's also a fascinating way to think of it. In Judaism in general, just a very quick aside. I do too many quick asides, which is why we're here. I just want to say, it's very important in Judaism, we usually do not have punitive punishment. Right? Usually in Judaism, punishment is meant to be rehabilitative in some way. Even when someone is put to death, putting someone to death is meant to be a form of kapara. It's meant to be a form of atonement. That's why I mentioned this before. That's why, interestingly enough, what's the one form of punishment we don't have in Judaism? Incarceration. We don't have jails. We don't have jails. We have holding cells. Sometimes when you don't know what to do with someone, but we don't have jails. Why? Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu understood long ago that putting someone in a box, putting someone in a cell, does not do anything to help address whatever their core issues are. You could flog the kishkas out of them, that may help, right? You could fine them, right? You could go ahead and punish them, in other words, you could send them to exile, but lamaisa, whatever the punishment is going to be, it should be restorative and rehabilitative in some way. So therefore, again, what the Gemara is essentially saying is, Golus is an atonement for someone who's a real shogeg. But if someone is a shogeg karav lemezid, there should be no Golus. So in this case over here, the flogger, why does he go to Golus? What's the case? The case is where the flogger made a mistake in the count. Okay, so Tafach le Rava b'Sandali. Supposed to listen to this. So Rava went ahead, and Rav Simi Ba'ashi said. So Rav Simi Narada said this idea that he made a mistake on the count. Rava kind of tapped him on the shoe. Amar le atu hu money. Do you think it's the flogger who counts? Vatanya. So remember again, so Malchus is administered in Beis Din. So remember, what's the process? The gadol, right? The most important of the judges, he goes kore. He reads. We'll say when you get flogged. So the Beis Din reads the psukim associated with your flogging. Whatever, you ate something non-kosher intentionally, right? So they'll read out the psukim of what it is that you did as they flog you. Vasheni mona, second dayan counts. Vashlishi omrei go. The third dayan says strike, and then you have a flogger. So the point over here that Rav is trying to make is the flogger isn't the counter. Se'ela amrav simin arda the ta dayana gufei. You're right. What's the case over here? The case over here is where you're right. The dayan made the mistake. So now this makes more sense. The flogger himself is not responsible for counting. So what ended up happening over here? The dayan made a mistake in the count, right? The flogger ended up administering one extra flog. One extra lash. So therefore, you're going to say, so the dayan is not going to be chayiv. Why? Because for him it's like grama. It's like grama, right? The guy who's flogging is really pure shogeg. But again, he did kill the guy. At the end of the day, he killed the guy, but it's pure shogeg. So that's a case, ultimately, again, that's a case where the Maisa, you'll go to Galus. Very interesting. It's also interesting that the flogger goes to Galus for that, right? In other words, here, the flogger literally is just following instructions. But you see from here, this excuse me, it's not a surprise because we have the concept of Adam Muad Li'olam. A person is always responsible for their actions. So therefore the flogger administered the death blow, so to speak. Therefore, again, purely accidentally, therefore he's going to go to Galus. Let's go back to Meisvei. Hazarik Esa'avim Surabim V'harag Harei Zagola. Both say a person throws a stone into Surabim and ends up killing someone, he goes to Galus. The shogeg karv lemeziru. The baile asugi did Surabim shlichi inshi. V'katarei Zagola. 1 second. Let's imagine the scene. Ruvain is standing in his backyard, right? And what does he do? He's throwing stones into Rosh Hashanah. Sure enough, what ends up happening? Shimon walks by, strikes him in the head, and Shimon dies. So the halacha is Ruvain goes to Galus. Galus. This is a case of shogeg karav lemezid, right? Why? I will say, guess what happens in Rosh Hashanah? Guess what happens? People walk, right? People happen in Rosh Hashanah. So you throw a stone, you throw a projectile into Rosh Hashanah, and you're surprised then when something happens. Now it's granted, Reuven didn't mean to kill Shimon, I understand that. So it's not premeditated to strike against an individual, but Lamaisa, at the end of the day, he's still responsible. So what's going on over here? So how could he go to Galus? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak b'sosres koslo. The case is where it's not that Reuven's throwing stones. Reuven's dismantling a stone wall, and a stone falls off and hits Shimon. Okay, he still has an obligation to watch what he's doing. But he's deconstructing, he's demolishing it at night. So at night, he assumes that no one is around. So the Gemara says, still to be vigilant at night as well. What's the case of us? He's dismantling a wall into a garbage dump. So he doesn't expect people to be there. So the Gemara says, what's the case of the ashpa? Say if there are people who always frequent the dump, right, then at the end of the day, he's amazed. If he acts, not amazed, but a karov amazed, if he's dismantling a wall and the stone kills someone. And if people don't normally go to this garbage dump, then I will say it's only in any circumstances. What's the case? The ashpa hasuya lipanos balayla, then hasuya lipanos bayom. Suppose Moses is interesting. But in general, what are people doing in a garbage dump? Let's say people use it as like an outhouse. So the case over here, Papa says, is where this was a garbage dump that people used at night to relieve themselves, but not really used by day. And ultimately, sometimes there are those who are even there by day as well. So So I'll say, so therefore what's the case? So therefore Reuven is dismantling his wall, and essentially if you could imagine for a moment his property abuts the garbage dump. So what is he doing? Pretty much like he's dismantling his wall by just like pushing stones into the dump. It turns out that someone is there, by day. Someone is there. He didn't expect someone to be there because people don't usually use that space during the day. So he's not a mazid, right? Mazid lo havi. He's not a mazid. Why? Because people aren't normally there by day. Onus nami lo havi He's all, but he can't be called an ones. Why can't he be called an ones? Because people sometimes do use the area by day. So therefore, if you are not a mazid and if you are not an ones, what are you? A shogeg. You're a shogeg, and therefore again, that's why the halach is that this individual will go to Galus. Incredible. Rabbi Shmuel Silber. So Rabbi said, Rabbi takes this entire conversation and he appends it to the Reisha. Remember, it's all going the price we quoted yesterday. Reuven, right? Reuven has a store. Reuven is a carpenter. He's a nagar. So Reuven has a store, and Shimon walks in without permission. And a splinter flies up and hits Shimon in the face. Umeis, and Shimon dies. Pater. Reuven is pater. When is that so? Or what does that mean? He's pater. Chayiv ba'arba dvarim upater megalus. Rabbi say he'll be chayiv in four things. He'll be chayiv in four things. But ultimately, again, patering also. Also, now when we say chayiv in four things, what does it mean chayiv in four things? The only time that you're chayiv in nezek, tsar, ripoy, sheves, right, and boshes would be the fifth, is when the guy is alive and injured, right? So obviously, the case over here is maze. The case over here is the splinter flew up and killed Shimon. If Shimon's dead, there's no dalad dvarim. But again, in the case where he would have been injured, right? So in a case where he kills him, he's pater ultimately again from Galus. He's pater from Galus, but ultimately again chayiv in arba dvarim. So ultimately again the Bava says, so the one who took this case and appended it to the seifa certainly would agree with this interpretation. But the one who went ahead originally and said it goes on the reisha would not agree with this interpretation. Why? Because the Bava says at the end of the day, if Reuven would have entered into Rishos, like his Rish was, then ultimately Michayev Galus. Michayev Galus, is that true? That if you enter in with Rishos to a domain and then end up getting killed accidentally, that you go ahead and go to Galus? Vatanya. Hanichnas lachanus hashanaf afinisan itzotsos v'tafchala apanov umeis. So let's listen to this. Same case, just different profession. Reuven is a blacksmith. He has a store. Shimon walks in. They're both saying, now remember again, the case over here is, he walks in, sparks fly up and kill Shimon. What's talacha? Pater. Ultimately, Reuven is going to be pater. Va'afilu nichnas birshus. And even if, pater from Galus, and even if Shimon entered in with permission. So what's the case here? Saying no, the case here is different. We're talking about again a blacksmith's apprentice. A blacksmith's apprentice. So I don't understand. Just because Shimon is a blacksmith's apprentice to Reuven, so therefore if Reuven kills him, ultimately again he's pater from Galus. Shulya denafchi lemikdalikai, because he's an apprentice, therefore again he deserves to die. Kisharabba misari v'labola says for eno yose. So I'll say no. What's the case? The case over here is where Reuven is telling Shimon, get out. It's a dangerous workspace. Get out, and Shimon doesn't listen. The Gemara says, "Umishum derabba misarif bolasis lemeith leikai." So because halacha l'mayis, so Reuven's telling Shimon to get out, but Shimon doesn't listen. So therefore, again, and he gets killed. So Reuven's exempt from that. So the Gemara says, "Kasavra yatsa." The case is where Reuven thought that Shimon already left. Reuven thought that Shimon left. Turns out that he didn't leave. Ultimately, again, a spark flies up, ends up killing Shimon. In that case, ultimately, again, Reuven is going to be pater from Galus. If that's the case, Acher Nami. If that's the case, then why do you have to set this up as that Shimon is the apprentice? Why don't you just set it up as a regular case that Shimon is a regular, I was at the apprentice? Suppose the top of Lamed Gimel, 33a. So the Gemara says, Acher lesle imsa derabe, hi isle imsa derabe. Both say there's a difference over here. In general, if Shimon is an unrelated customer, just because Reuven tells him to leave doesn't mean that ultimately, again, the customer is going to listen, and therefore Reuven has to be cognizant of the fact that someone may be there. When it comes to the apprentice, the assumption is that the apprentice has a certain level of reverence for the master, and therefore, again, if Reuven tells Shimon to leave, Reuven has every right to assume that what? Shimon's going to leave. That's the right he has to assume. If Shimon doesn't, then the truth is he's a shtickle ones. Okay. So the Gemara says, Rav Zvidu shei Rava masni la'aha umatza prat lamamtzi es atzmo. So we'll also listen to this. The pasuk when it talks about again killing someone b'shogeg. But remember again, let's take a step back. What's the paradigmatic case of killing someone b'shogeg? Right, the yar, the forest. Right, the forest. Reuven and Shimon. Right, Reuven's chopping wood. Doesn't know that anyone else is there. Splinter flies off, kills Shimon, goes to Gola. So we'll say, so the lashon in the pasuk is v'nashla barzel min ha'etz. So either means the axe head falls off the handle, or a splinter flies off the wood. Umatza es re'ehu, and the splinter finds Shimon. That's lashon umatza es re'ehu. This is interesting. So the Gemara says umatza prat lamamtzi es atzmo. So we'll say matzah means the object found Shimon, but Shimon didn't find the object. Now listen, what does this mean? This is actually very interesting. Mikan Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Mishi Yatzasa Evan Mitachas Yado, V'hotzi Hala Es Rosho V'kibla Pater. So also here's an interesting case. Imagine for a moment Reuven throws a stone. Now at the moment that Reuven released the stone, ultimately no one was in sight. Then as the stone is flying, what happens? Shimon sticks his head out of his window, to see what's going on, and Nebuch, the stone strikes him and kills him. In that case, ultimately, again, Reuven will be pater from Galus. Why? Because we'll say in that case, the halacha looks at it is the stone didn't find Shimon. Rather, what happened? Shimon found the stone. Shimon found the stone. So in other words, we'll say the distinction is, we've saw this before also, that in halacha, so much of the halachic reality is determined at the moment of the beginning of the event. So when Reuven throws the stone, if Shimon is in the equation, Shimon's already present, then Einach Inami, there could be Galas liability. But if Shimon introduces himself, so to speak, to the equation, after the stone has already left Reuven's hands, then there's no liability ultimately for Galas. Now, yeah, fine. So here it is. So that's true. In other words, if Shimon ends up getting killed, Reuven will be pater from Galus. But remember, but let's say Shimon doesn't get killed. Let's say Shimon is injured. Then what will be the halacha? Then ultimately Reuven will be chayiv in daled dvarim. Rashi says why? Obviously, again, remember, we always have Adam Muad Li'olam. And what does Adam Muad Li'olam essentially mean? Whenever you damage, you're responsible. That's bottom line what it means. If you damage, you are responsible. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if Shimon gets killed, no galus. But if Shimon gets injured, chayv and dal dvarim. So the Gemara says, man demasni la'aha kosh kina kamaisa. So the one who sets it up this way, I'll say certainly agrees with the previous interpretation. Uman demasni kamaisa. But the one who sets up the previous interpretation, avalaha patel gamre. In this case, I will say one can make the argument that usually patel gamre. Since I will say, remember again, we'll say and that's how paskin. I just want to point out, we actually paskin in this case, pater legamre. In other words, if Reuven throws a stone, Shimon is nowhere to be found. Then as the stone is flying through, Shimon sticks his head out the window and gets hit with the stone, Reuven would not be chay. I'll tell you what this is comparable to, Rabbi saying. Remember the case of where Reuven stands on the roof, and Reuven stands on the roof and drops a kli, and there are cushions on the bottom, right? And then Shimon comes along and Yeah, and removes the cushions, right? And what's the halacha? What's the halacha? So Reuven's pater, right? Why is Reuven pater? Because at the moment that Reuven threw the kli off the roof, ultimately again the kli was not going to break. So go back to what I said before. You see that in halacha, the way we judge an act is the way ultimately again the. Yeah. Okay. Let me say it differently. I'm sorry. I will say I apologize. I got back from a wedding from Lakewood at 2:00 in the morning. So just the operating, not the. I think I'm here, right? Am I? Here. Good. All right. Hey, so it's okay. I got this. Hey, so let's say. So again. So the way we go ahead and judge an act is essentially by going ahead and judging the intended consequence or the projected consequence at the time of the initiation of the act. So therefore, when Reuven drops a kli off a roof, right, and there are cushions on the bottom, that is a kli that is not going to break. If Shimon goes ahead and subsequently removes the cushions, Reuven's not liable for that. That's why the reverse case is true also. Reuven drops the kli off the roof, and Shimon comes with a baseball bat, right, and breaks it. What's Shimon's liability? None. Why? That was a broken kli. When Reuven throws the rock, if there is no one in that collision course, so then Reuven's ultimately going to be pater. Shimon goes ahead and introduces himself afterwards. That's a new variable. That's a new variable that wasn't present at the time that Reuven threw the rock. So therefore, again, the halacha would be that he's pater. Certainly pater from galus if he kills him, and it sounds like according to the Gemara, maybe even pater from daled dvarim. Okay, good. Let's go back to Tana Abana. Both say the really interesting case over here. Really interesting case. Apolim, let's go. Apolim shabal litbos charim mibala bayis. This is a very interesting case, right? Workers. So let's say Reuven has workers. Workers need to get paid. So the workers show up to Reuven's house to ask for their paycheck. They will say, now, what's interesting about this over here is they're not coming to the place of employment to collect paycheck. They're coming to Reuven's house. V'nagchan shoro shabalabayis, and they get gored by the ox of the balabayis. V'nashchan kalbo shabalabayis. Just saying, right? Naksha, right? Again, naksha, right? And they get bit by the dog of the balabayis, umeis, and they die. I'm using it plural because it's plural. But again, someone dies. So let's halacha. We'll say so. Pater. Ultimately, again, the balabayis Reuven is pater. Achirim omrim rashan so pater. Now we'll say now. Bepashtos. Why is the balabayis pater? Why is the balabayis pater? Bepashtos. Why are the workers showing up at Reuven's house to get paid? That's not how this works. You get paid at your place of employment. So the fact that's what it sounds like. Well, we'll interpret this right. So therefore, again, first opinion says, listen, you come onto someone's property, that's at your own risk. Other opinions say no. Workers have a right to get paid, and if the employer doesn't pay them, they have a right to show up at the employer's house to get their money. Say, hey, dummy, what's the case? So we'll say if Reuven, the employer, is normally found in the city. In other words, being in the city means you don't have to come to his house to get paid. He's found at the place of employment. So we'll say at the end of the day, if Reuven is normally found at the place of employment, so then why would the workers have the right to show up at his house? And if they do show up at his house, if something happens to them, it's on them. It's not on Reuven. But if Reuven is normally found at home, that's normally where he spends his time. So my time with Tanakama, then ultimately again, the workers should have every right to come there to collect their money. And if that's the case, why does the Tanakama say that Reuven is exempt? This is great. We'll say, what's the case? The case is Reuven the shchiach v'lo shchiach. It's such a great lashon. Reuven is very often found at work, unless he's not. I actually know a lot of people like this, right? They're found at work unless they're not, right? So the mice again. What does this mean? So here's the case. So therefore, what that does is it's not uncommon, therefore, for the workers to show up at Reuven's house asking for payment. That's the point over. This wouldn't be like an uncommon thing or an irregular thing to do. So now watch this. So I'll say watch. So now here's the case. Reuven, who's sometimes found at home, sometimes not found at home. So therefore it's normal for them to come to Reuven's house to collect payment. They knock on the door. Let's say Amr Lahu in. Reuven says yes. He calls out yes. Samar Savra in all ta mashma. One opinion says, when someone says yes, Yes means come in. Come in, enter. Umar savar in koma duchtech mashma. And the other says, yes, stay where you are. Right, stay where you are. State your intention. Rabbi says, now watch this. So this is machlokes. So Tanakama says, ultimately again, so yes means yes, stay where you are and state your intentions. And therefore, if they come in, get bitten by the dog or gored by the ox, that's on them. That's on them. Second opinion, Achirim say no. Yes means yes, come in, and therefore again, if they get gored or bitten, it's on the balabais. So interesting. So in kuma duchtech mashma. So we have rights that supports the opinion that says that yes means yes, stay where you are. Stay where you are. Desanya posh nichlas advos chami balabais. V'nacho shosha balabais. Onoshcho kalbo potter. So this is fascinating. So this is the same case, right? Employee comes to go ahead and claim his salary from his employer, and what happens? He gets bitten by a dog, the employer's dog, or gored by the ox. Ultimately, again, Reuven, the employer is potter. So the Gemara says, "Elalav dekari abava va'amrle in ushmamina in koma duchtech masha." Must be a case where he knocked on the door. Reuven said yes, and again, Shimon took that to mean he should enter. He entered. He got bitten or he got gored. He's potter. What do you see from here? That yes means yes, stay where you are, state your intentions, and I'll come to you. And I'll say that's how you paskin. It's actually interesting. That's how you paskin that halacha l'maisa. When you knock on the door and someone says yes, yes is not an invitation to enter. Yes means either it means I'm coming, stay where you are, or it means state your business, stay where you are. But one way or another, what does it mean? Stay where you are, do not enter. Fascinating. Mishnah. Let's say, let's go. Shnei shvarim tamin shechavlu zeh. So now it's an interesting case. Up until now, we've always been dealing with situations where halacha l'maisa, you have one party damaging another party. Let's say a shar damaging another shar, or a shar damaging adam. And I will say in all these cases there was a damager and the damaged party, right? An aggressor and a victim. Now we're transitioning a little bit to a different case where there's mutual damage. Mutual damage. That's the case over here. So shnei shvarim tamin shechavlu zeh et zeh. So let's say now let's say you have two shvarim, two shars, two oxen that are both tam. Right, they're two tamim. Right, they're both tamim, and therefore again they injure each other, they damage each other. So let's remember again, what does tam pay? Tam, right? Karen tam pays chatzi nezek. So what's the halacha? So mishlam moser chatzi nezek. So essentially, what we look at is like this: how much did A damage B? How much did B damage A? Right? Let's see. So if the amount is a wash, then it's a wash. If there's any excess damage, so Rabbi says, so the one who has the excess damage is entitled to chatzi nezek of the excess damage. Okay, so the Gemara says shnei muadin. What happens if the two oxen that injured each other are both muads? So masham ben b'moser nezek sham. Same thing. We look at damage that each one got, right? And whatever excess damage there is that one has over the other, again he gets quote unquote the excess of the nezek shalim, or whatever would be left in the nezek shalim pot. In other words, we'll say obviously the nezek shalim that one is entitled to is offset by what? By the damage it did to the other. Okay, beautiful. For straightforward cases. What happens, we'll say, if one of the oxen is a tam and one is a muad? We'll say, now remember, they're injuring each other. So what's the halacha? Muad b'tam mishal b'moser nezek shalim. Tam b'muad mishalim b'moser chatzi nezek. So we'll say, so once again, after we go ahead and take into account the damage they did to each other, so the tam will have to pay in excess whatever it still owes of the value of chatzi nezek, and the muad will have to pay whatever it still owes in the value or in the amount ultimately of nezek shalim. Beautiful. So the Gemara goes weiter. So good. V'chein shnei anashim shechavlu zeh zeh. Similarly, if you have Reuven and Shimon who injure each other, suppose I same idea. Reuven and Shimon get into a fight. And let's say again, they're both responsible. So what's the halacha now? Reuven owes Shimon nezek shalim, and Shimon owes Reuven nezek shalim. So what do? We look at the damages that they owe each other, and whatever, if there's any excess, then the one who owes the excess will pay the other. Good. Adam b'muad umuad ba'adam. We'll say, let's say again, a person injures a muad, right? Adam b'muad umuad ba'adam. So what's halacha? Mishalim b'moser nezek shalim. Ultimately, we'll say once again, we'll say it's all the same formula. When two parties are injuring each other, essentially again, mutual. So a certain amount of damages will cancel each other out, and then whatever is still left in the pot, so to speak, of damages will get paid to the aggressor. Will get paid to the victim. Adam b'tam ba'adam. Adam b'tam mishalim b'moser nezek shalim. Remember, if an Adam goes and injures a tam animal, that's nezek shalim, because man always pays nezek shalim. Tam ba'adam mishalim b'moser chatzi nezek. But the tam, ultimately, again, the person will pay whatever is left over after chatzi nezek, or whatever is still left in the chatzi nezek pot. Rabbi Akiva says, af tam shechava ba'adam mishalim b'moser nezek shalim. Rabbi Akiva holds, on the other hand, that when a tam injures a person, so we'll say, remember again, let's say the Adam and the Tam are getting into it. So what happens again? Rabbi Akiva holds that ultimately when a Tam injures a person, you pay Nezek Shalim. Okay, so we'll discuss that position in the Gemara just a little bit. So we'll say, let's go. Says the Gemara. Fine. Tarabanim. Kimishpat hazeh ya'aselo. So we'll say, so the pasuk says, so this is talking about an ox that gores. O ben yigach, o bas yigach, kamishpat hazeh ya'aselo. If the ox goes in and doesn't gore another ox, but rather gores a human being, ultimately, again, like this mishpat, like this halacha, you will do for them, or do to them. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Kimishpat hazeh ya'aselo, kimishpat shar b'shar, kach mishpat shar ba'adam. We'll say, the same halachas of one shore goring another shore apply to one shore goring a person. Same exact halachas. Mashar b'shar tam shalim chatzi nezek. First white line. Muad nezek shalim. Both say just like when one ox scores another ox, right? If it's a tam, it's chatzi nezek, and if it's a muad, it's nezek shalim. Afshar ba'adam tam mishalim chatzi nezek. Muad mishalim umuad nezek shalim. So Rabbi says, so this is the opinion. So the Tana Kama holds that halacha l'meisa. The interesting part about a shar is that it's always the same halachas. Tam always pays chatzi nezek, muad pays nezek shalim, and here's the chap. It doesn't matter who the ox is goring. Whether the ox is goring another ox or whether the ox is goring a person, halacha l'maisa, same payment table. Rabbi Akiva Amar no. Kimishpat hazeh kitachton v'lo ke'elyon. Rabbi Akiva says no. Kimishpat only refers to that which comes after it, right? In other words, we'll say the idea ultimately again that halacha l'maisa of chatzi nezek versus nezek shalim is only a din of one ox goring another ox. But if we're dealing over here with an ox goring a person, Rabbi Akiva says ultimately again nezek shalim. Nezek shalim. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Yachol, Kimishvat hazek kitachton v'lo ke'elyon, Yachol mishalim min aliyah. You might have thought ultimately again he has to pay from the best of his property. So in other words, I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, that see what Rabbi Akiva is saying is like this. Rabbi Akiva is saying that the idea of a tam paying chatzi nezek and a muad paying nezek shalim, that's only shar on shar violence, right? Shar on shar violence is chatzi nezek and nezek shalim, but shar on Adam, that's going to go ahead and pay nezek shalim. Nezek shalim. Now you might have thought that halacha l'maisa min aliyah, you have to pay from the best as well. Yachol mishalim min aliyah. Tamalomar ya'aselo migufo mishalim ve'ena mishalim min aliyah. So we'll say no. Look at Rashi. Yachol tam shchava ba'adam yeh kamua l'chol dvarav. Now we'll say now in general, remember again when you're a muad, not only do you pay nezek shalim, but you're also paying min aliyah from the best property. So you might have thought that even when a tam goes ahead and injures an adam, that he's like a muad in everything, namely that he even goes ahead and pays min aliyah. Kamash malan, no, he doesn't have to pay min aliyah. Ultimately, again, he only pays migufo from the value of the damaging animal itself. Okay, v'rabanan, v'rabanan. Lamali the pot. Lamali. What do the Rabbanan use this for? The prochami arba dvarim. Ultimately, again, to exempt. We'll say in this kind of case, to exempt from arba dvarim. Rabbi Akiva the prochami arba dvarim inali. Where does Rabbi Akiva know to exempt from arba dvarim? Nafkale mi ish ki yitin mum ba'amito. We'll say we know the pasuk says when a person will injure another person, ish ba'amito v'lo shar ba'amito. Rabbi said the only time you pay dal dvarim is when when people injure each other. But when one of the participants in the injury is a shar, there's no daled dvarim involved over here. I will say, obviously, you understand, we're not talking about paying daled dvarim to the shar. We're talking about if the shar injures a person, maybe the owner of the shar should be chayiv in daled dvarim. Kamash mala, no. The din on daled dvarim is only a din when two people are injuring each other. One person is injuring another person. But wherever there is an animal involved in the process, there are damages, but ultimately no responsibility ultimately again for daled dvarim. So the Rabbanan would have said it from here. Hava min etzar l'chudei aval ripoy sheves emalitinle. I might have thought maybe no tsar, but maybe ripoy and sheves you do. Kamash v'lo, no. I will say when it's shar on adam violence, ultimately again no daled dvarim. So I will say what comes out of here is really something very interesting. I will say now I'll just point out that halacha we don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva. It was Rabbi Akiva, rather again, we pass like the Tanakama. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, if a tam animal injures an adam, that's chasi nezek. That's chasi nezek. So Rabbi Akiva is of this opinion that whenever a shar injures a person, it is always going to be nezek shalim. That's Rabbi Akiva's shita. Rabbi Akiva's shita. That chatzi nezek is only a din on shar violence. But if it's shar on adam violence, nezek shalim, that's not how we pass like Tanakama, that a tam always has the same halachas. Whether it's a tam injuring another animal, or it's a tam ultimately injuring a person, it is always going to be chatzi nezek. We also paskin that the obligation to pay daled dvarim is only a din on human violence, right? When it involves people. The moment that there's a shar involved, there's damages, but l'maisa again, no daled dvarim. Fascinating Mishnah, shar shaveh mana, shenagach shar shav masayim. So this is an interesting case. Let's say you have a shar that's worth 100 mana, or 100 zuz, that went ahead and injured a shar, right, gored a shar that was worth 200 zuz. Now I will say, remember again, ve'ein hana ve'la yafeklum. Now I will say, let's say that this is a case where the animal was totaled, so to speak, right? So the carcass is worth nothing. Now remember again, I will say, this is a tam case. What do you get for tam case? Chatzi nezek. So therefore, again, I will say, now we're assuming chatzi nezek is bidenizak shaiminan. What is half damages assessed by? Half damages is assessed by the victim. So we'll say, so in this case, the victim was worth how much? 200 zuz. So therefore, again, how much is the owner entitled to recapture? 100 zuz. Now, remember the sugya we saw before? Now, generally, the victim offsets his claim by what? The value of the carcass, and the victim is also obligated to dispose of the carcass, sell it off, and recapture the amount. In this case, the victim's shar was totaled, right? Whatever. Most you can have a case where it was gored off a cliff, right? So there's no recoverable asset anymore. So therefore, I will say all the owner of the dead shar is entitled to is chatzi nezek 100 zuz, and it just happens to be, I will say, what's the value of the aggressor shar? What's the value? 100 zuz, which is exactly chatzi nezek. So what's the halacha? No talas hashar. In this case, Shabbosai, the victim, right, the owner of the dead shar, could go ahead and seize the live shar as repayment. Right, Mazel Tov, right, okay, everybody's made whole, right, so Lamai said that's it, so he's made whole, so again, he's getting his chatzi nezek in the form of a shar. Alright, interesting, so that's the chatzi nezek. Now I will say, the truth is, there's what's the novelty in this case? The novelty in this case is that you could seize the aggressor shar, and in other words, you have a right to seize the shar, as opposed to just a right to monetary compensation. So it says the Gemara, so let's analyze this, because they'll say this is not pasha, because we always thought chatzi nezek is a debt. Right? Then, in other words, the owner of the aggressor shar owes chatzi nezek. But now we're saying that again, the owner of the dead shar could actually seize the live shar. So it says the Gemara, Mastisiman, who's the opinion of the Mishnah? It's Rabbi Akiva. The Sanya. Yusham hashar bebezdin div Rabbi Shmuel. So I'll say Rabbi Akiva Omer hochlat hashar. So I'll say now watch this. In general, there is this discussion that I will say that halacha l'maisa, if you have a shar that does damage. Right, if you have a shar that does damage. So first of all, look at Rashi. Yusham hashar. Rashi says Yusham hashar hamazik bebezdin v'yitin lo mazik maos demei hashar shu chatzi nisko ubeshavem mana shenagach l'shavem asayim ve'inan avei l'shavem klum kamayri. So Rabbi say now in general, the halacha is like this. Everybody says as follows, that when you have a damaging shar, what do? You bring it to Beis Din, and you assess the value in Beis Din. You assess the value of Beis Din. So I'll say, and then again, now this is also going with the, remember beforehand we had the discussion that when you pay Chatzi Nezek, it's Chatzi Nezek of what? Of what? Is it Chatzi Nezek of the animal that was killed or injured, or Chatzi Nezek of the animal that is the aggressor? See here, the Brisa seems to indicate that ultimately, again, it's Chatzi Nezek of the aggressor animal, which is not as important for us right now, but you're going to see what's important. But the idea is, you take the animal to Beis Din and you assess it. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva Omer Huchlat Ashar. Rabbi Akiva says, no, that's not what happens. Huchlat Ashar means that now both parties own 50% of the shar. Both parties own 50% of the shar. But what are they arguing about? Rabbi Shmuel Silber, Baal Chofu, Vezuzihu Demaskile, Rabbi Akiva Savar, Shutfihu, Shutfininu. So we'll say, watch this. This is so fascinating. We'll say, listen to this. When let's say Reuven injures Shimon, right? Reuven injures Shimon, right? Or I should say Reuven Shar injures Shimon Shar. So now both say, so now what's the halacha? Let's assume that Reuven Shar is a tam, therefore there's going to be a din of Chatzi Nezek. So both say, so now we're operating with the idea that Chatzi Nezek is in the damaging animal. Let's just go with that, even though that's not how we paskin, but let's just go with that for illustration purposes. So Chatzi Nezek now is in the damaging animal. So we'll say, so now how do we look at this? How do we look at this? So Rabbi Shmuel says, how do we look at it? It's a debt. It's a debt. Right, Reuven owes Shimon Chatzi Nezek. What, so to speak, secures that debt? What secures that debt? The actual value of the damaging animal. But Shimon doesn't own any part of Reuven's animal. Rabbi Akiva says, not true. The moment that Reuven's animal injures Shimon, and now Shimon ultimately is entitled to Chatzi Nezek, I will say, what happens? He gets a 50% ownership interest in Reuven's animal. Wow. Wow. So now watch this. So what are they arguing about? They're arguing the following pasuk. So the Gemara says, what's the pasuk? They will sell the living shar and go out and divide up the money. So Rabbi Shmuel Savra lebeidina comes dar rachmara. So Rabbi Shmuel says, this is talking to Beis Din. We'll say that if somehow Reuven can't come up with the money to go out and pay Shimon, Beis Din intervenes and they'll sell the asset. What's the asset in this case? What's the asset? The asset is Reuven shar. Sell the asset, split the funds. Rabbi Akiva Savar lenizak umazik masul rabbanon. Rabbi Akiva says, no, who's the person talking to? It's talking to Reuven and Shimon. Reuven and Shimon, mazel tov, you are now partners in a shar. So what do you need to do? You need to go out and sell it off and split the proceeds. Incredible. So my ben Abba say, what's the machal? Okay, so we'll say, by the way, you hear this? This is incredible. So remember again, there's a lot of presuppositions over here, which are that number one, that Allah lamaisa, that when there's Chatzi Nezek is going in the damaging animal, right? And lamaisa again now, so the question is, does Reuven owe Shimon money? And therefore, again, but the debt is secured, so to speak, by the damaging animal? Or no, the moment that Shimon is entitled to Chatzi Nezek, Shimon takes a 50% ownership interest in Reuven's animal. Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. So the Gemara says, my beinayu, both say, what's the nafkamina? I'll give you some good nafkaminas. Hikdisho nizak ika beinayu. We'll say, let's say Shimon, the damaged party, ultimately, again, is makdish, the aggressor animal, right? So we'll say, so again, according to Rabbi Akiva, that'll actually work. According to Rabbi Shmuel, it won't work. Okay, so by Rav Nachman, Machru Mazik, what happens? I will say, if Reuven decides to sell off the animal, so after Reuven's animal did damage to Shimon, and now Reuven owns Chatzi Nezek, Reuven decides to sell off the animal. What's talacha? So does that work? Rabbi Shmuel Mahu. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, what's talacha? Kevin Rabbi Shmuel Baal Chofu Vezuzi Hu Demasik Le Machar. So I want to say, according to Rabbi Shmuel, all Reuven owes Shimon is what? What does Reuven owe Shimon? He owes him money. He owes him money. But what doesn't Shimon have? Shimon doesn't have an interest in the animal, right? He doesn't own the animal. Therefore, if Reuven chooses to sell the animal, Reuven has the ability to do so. O Dilma, Amud Bezer will say, O Dilma, Keva de Mishabe le Linizak lav kol kamine. Maybe on the other hand, since there is a lien, so to speak, against the animal, or the animal is an encumbered animal, right? So maybe again, Reuven doesn't have the right to go out and sell it. Amrle Eina Machar. So he responded, if Reuven tries to sell the animal, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So the Vatanya Machra, but we learned in a Brisa that if Reuven does try to sell the animal, it does work. So the Gemara says, Choser v'gofo. So also what it means is actually very interesting. What it means is that halacha l'maisa, if Reuven can't pay Shimon, what could Shimon do? Shimon could go to the purchaser and go ahead and collect the animal ultimately as payment for his debt. Choser v'govo. So v'chimi achar shechoser v'govo lama machar. But at the end of the day, I will say, if halacha l'maisa, Shimon has the ability to go ahead and go back and seize it. So what does it mean ultimately again that it's sold? L'redia means for plowing. Rashi says l'redia shimcharosh balokeach eino nosin d'meach harishal nizak. Okay, we'll say what it meant is that if Reuven went in and sold the animal for plowing, and ultimately again the animal was used for plowing, so that was a valid sale in that way. But technically speaking, Shimon, the victim, has the ability to go back and seize the shar from purchasers if Reuven, the aggressor, doesn't have the ability to pay him. Shmamina. So we'll say, what do you see from this? Shmamina lova umocher metaltalin. So what do you see from here? You see from here that someone borrowed money, and let's say had property, sold that movable property, and now can't repay their debt. Beis din goven lo mehem. Beis din ultimately again could go back and collect that sold property in satisfaction of the debt. To which the Gemara says, no, that's different. Why shiny house in this case is different? Why? The command da asoa potiki dami. Now, I'll say in general, when you owe someone, right? Let's say Reuven lends money to Shimon, right? And now what happens? Or let's say Reuven borrows money from Shimon, and I will say now Reuven has metaltalin that he sells off, movable property that he sells off, and Reuven can't go ahead and pay back the debt. So we'll say in general, Beis din doesn't seize metaltalin in satisfaction of a debt. The only thing that Beis din normally will seize, or can be seized, is what? Is karka, is real property. So we'll say, so in this case, what's happening over here? Reuven's shar injured Shimon. Reuven now owes Shimon chatzin nezek. Reuven sells the shar. So let's say, so now what's the halacha? Let's say Reuven can't come up with the money. Okay, right, where he can't come up with the money. So what's the halacha? Shimon could go and seize the shar from the purchaser in satisfaction of the chatzin nezek. But I will say, but that's interesting because a shar is metaltalin, and normally you can seize movable property in satisfaction of a debt. To which Rava says it's different over here. Why? I'm sorry. Kiman dasa apotiki. Remember again, what's that apotiki? An apotiki, that's a contraction for apotehei kai, where you designate a specific source of repayment. A specific source of repayment. You say, from here, I'm going to repay you. So we'll say, so therefore, if you designate metaltalin as a specific source of repayment, and then again, those metaltalin are subsequently sold off by the debtor, the creditor has the ability to go ahead and collect that movable property in the event that the debtor is unable to pay with cash. So if you made your evet, for example, an apotiki, and you sold him off, so Balchov go v'heimenu. Balchov can go and collect. Shora apotiki umachro. What if you made your ox an apotiki and then you sell it off? In Balchov go v'heimenu. Ultimately, again, a Balchov can't go and collect it. So we'll say, see, it doesn't even work. Even if you make your shar an apotiki, you can't seize it. So the Gemara says, Eved my time. Why isn't Eved different? Mishum de islay kala. Because we'll say in general, both remember again, the only time you could seize property is where the purchaser could have had the possibility to be aware that it was encumbered. So therefore, again, I will say, if you sell an encumbered eved, people know about that. Right? A shar, apparently, again, people don't know. But why is this case different? The Gemara says, Hai nami, kevan de nagach kala islay, de turna chana karle. So we'll say, in general, if you sell an encumbered animal, so the creditor can't seize it. Why? Because an encumbered animal doesn't have a call. People don't know about that. Because people don't know about that, they can't take the proper steps to protect themselves. Because they can't protect themselves, you can't seize it in satisfaction of a debt. However, what does have a call? A shar that gores, people know about. So we'll say, so therefore again, let's take a step back, let's bring this together. So therefore, Reuven's ox gores Shimon's ox. Reuven is chayiv to Shimon, chatzin nezek. Okay, fine. We're going with the assumption over here that it's a debt. right? We're going with the opinion that says that Shimon does not acquire a 50% ownership interest in Ruvain's animal. Instead, Ruvain owes Shimon's money. Ruvain now sells that damaging animal. Now it turns out that what? Ruvain has no money to pay Shimon. What's the halacha? Shimon could go and seize the animal that Ruvain sold, right? And Shimon could seize it in satisfaction of his debt. One second, but how can you do it? It's metaltalin, and generally you can't seize metaltalin. Creditor can't seize metaltalin. This is different because it's an apotiki. It's a defined source of repayment, or a defined source, an identified source of payment. But normally you can't make an animal a source of payment. This animal is different. Why? Because Rabbi say it has a kol. Why does it have a kol? Why does everybody know about it? It's a goring animal. People know about that. Incredible. So Tanrav Chaliva Bar Ma'arava Kamed Rabbi Avo Machro in. So the Gemara is machro. So machro in machar. We'll say so now. But Rabbi Tachliva has a different version. Rabbi Tachliva says if Ruvain tries to sell the goring animal, it does not work. Hekdisho mukdash. But if he tried to make it hekdish, it does work. So machro man. So we'll say who's selling it? Who's selling the animal? Ilema mazik machro. So I'm sorry. Ilema mazik. If it's the damager, Ruvain selling his animal. So the Gemara says in machar and it's not sold. Money. Rabbi Akiva. That was Rabbi Akiva. The Amar hochlat hashar. So Rabbi Akiva holds that when Ruvain's animal damages Shimon, Rabbi say what happens? That animal now is owned jointly by Ruvain and Shimon. So that makes sense why Ruvain wouldn't have the ability to sell that animal unilaterally. Vikdisha hukdash, but it also says that if Ruvain is makdishet, it works. Who is that? Son of Rabbi Shmuel. So we'll say the Amar Yusam Ashar. But basically, that seems to reflect Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says that Shimon doesn't get an ownership interest in the animal. Rather, again, he gets a financial. He's owed money. If that's the case, Ruvain is still the sole owner, and as the sole owner, he has the ability to be makdishet. So we'll say, so that's strange to say that the first statement is Rabbi Akiva. I'm sorry, the first statement is Rabbi Shmuel says Rabbi Akiva. That's strange. Ella nizak machro. In machar, so rather it has to be who sold the shar? Shimon, the damaged party, and that doesn't work. Why? Who is paying the money? Rabbi Shmuel. That reflects the view of Rabbi Shmuel. Hekdisho mukdash asal Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, and it must be the that's Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Akiva is the one who says that if he tries to make it hekdish, it's hekdish. So we'll say, so it's just strange because one statement is reflecting Rabbi Shmuel, and one statement is reflecting Rabbi Akiva. Liolam mazik. Now we'll say, what's the case? The case is where the mazik, it's Ruvain who's selling or being makdish. V'divri akol machru eina machar. Everyone agrees that if Ruvain tries to sell the animal, it doesn't work. Why? Afilu Rabbi Shmuel to hamashab. We'll say everyone agrees that Ruvain can't sell the animal. Why can't Ruvain sell the animal? According to Rabbi Akiva, because again, Shimon owns 50%. But even according to Rabbi Shmuel, the source of repayment for Shimon is going to come from where? From that animal. So because of that, it's really heavily encumbered. Because it's heavily encumbered, the halacha doesn't allow Ruvain to go and sell it off. Hikdisho mukdash, but I will say it can be makdish. I feel Rabbi Akiva. That it goes even according to Rabbi Akiva. Why? We should Rabbi Avo, don't Rabbi Avo. Gezer Shem Yomru, hekdish yotzei below pidyon. And I will say the case ultimately again of hekdish, that if you're makdish it, it's hekdish, right? I will say in general, we're always nervous that if somebody's makdish something, to say that it's not hekdish, we get nervous. Why? Because if Ruvain says it's hekdish, and now suddenly it's not hekdish, people could erroneously think that something could transfer out of hekdish even without any redemption process. So what ends up over here, is a really fascinating fundamental machlokes, we'll say, that when Ruvain's animal damages Shimon, right, and now again, Ruvain owes Shimon chatzi nezek. So the Maise, again, I will say, what's their relationship to the damaging animal? So we have fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel ultimately says, Shimon has no ownership interest in that animal. All he's owed is money. Rabbi Akiva, no, he owns 50%. Rabbi say, how do we paskin? So we'll say we're going to see, interestingly enough, that to a certain degree, we really paskin Rabbi Akiva, that really we view Shimon as having an active ownership interest in the animal itself. Now, what that does, Rabbi say, is what? It safeguards Shimon that Allah so Ruvain can't take any unilateral action with the animal, thereby depriving Shimon of repayment. We'll stop over here for today. Continue tomorrow. Say, oh, shkoyach. Collecting money. But again, that's the norm. That's the norm.